Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. So after our admission talk this morning and our alumni and student sharings in the afternoon, now it is your chance to have a taste of how a psychology lecture is like. So we welcome Dr. Feldman to give us a guest lecture on cognitive biases and how they affect our life. So it's about decision making. Thank you, Dr. Feldman.
Yes, thank you. Very happy to talk to all of you. I think I have half an hour to spend with you. It's not a lot of time. Usually the lectures go for a bit longer, but hopefully this will give you a teaser to some of the stuff that I do in my research and perhaps some of my colleagues at the Department of Psychology. What are cognitive biases? Why is this important for us in our lives? We'll do some fun activities together. I'll start with a very interesting and somewhat curious effect that I recently saw on TikTok. It really blew up. It was kind of, it went viral. And perhaps you even came across this. I'll start with this in order to demonstrate something to you. Hopefully it will load up okay. Curious, what exactly is happening here? We're hearing exactly the same sound, but whatever it is that we focus on, whether we focus on the right, we hear brainstorm, we focus on the left, we hear green needle, but green needle doesn't sound anything like brainstorm. So how come we hear exactly the same sound, but just by focusing on something on the left and reading green needle, we hear green needle, and then we hear exactly the same sound, we focus on the right, we see brainstorm, and then suddenly we hear brainstorm. So how is it that our eyesight and the brain processing is causing us to hear something completely different, even though, as you can see, the sound is exactly the same? So this is kind of like a viral TikTok version of a very famous effect that's called the McGurk effect. And I'll show you a very short clip of a BBC video that's explaining this with one of the experts who are talking about the McGurk effect. Let's hear it from the BBC video McGurk effect specialists.
At any one moment, we are being bombarded by sensory information. Our brains do a remarkable job of making sense of it all. It seems easy enough to separate the sounds we hear from the sights we see. But there is one illusion that reveals this isn't always the case.
Ba, ba, ba.
Have a look at this. What do you hear?
Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba.
But look what happens when we change the picture.
Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba. Ba.
And yet, the sound hasn't changed. In every clip, you are only ever hearing ba with a B.
Ba, ba, ba.
It's an illusion known as the McGurk effect.
Ba.
Take another look.
Ba.
Concentrate first on the right of the screen.
Ba.
Now to the left of the screen.
Ba.
The illusion occurs because what you are seeing clashes with what you are hearing.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting effect. It's impossible to overcome. So even if you've studied this for many years, you still, this is exactly what it is that you see. And it seems like whenever, you know, what we see and what we hear is clashing, somehow what it is that we're looking at overrides what it is that we're actually hearing. And that's the priority that eyesight gets over hearing in this case. Lots of other illusions that are very easy for us to demonstrate. Over here, the typical illusion is which desk is longer. Is it the one on the left side or the one on the right side? So you can take a few seconds to kind of look at this and make an assessment. A lot of people look at the left one and they say, this one on the left seems a lot longer. But then we can put just a ruler, and this is exactly the same ruler. And as you can see, this one, the length is 16, while this one is 20. So actually this one is longer than this one. So this is an interesting illusion. Another kind of illusion is when we look at these three spots together. Here we see brown, here we see brown, but this one seems a bit orangey over here. And the difference is that this orangey one is surrounded by dark, and this brown one is surrounded by something that's a bit brighter. And there's a way for me to demonstrate to you that actually these are exactly the same color. So if we take away the context, actually what you can see is that these two are the same. If this is not convincing enough for you, another way to do this with exactly the same thing without removing the context is basically putting this kind of brown one. So you can actually still see that here this looks orange and here it looks brown, but the whole thing together, if we look at this whole line, actually we see the same color. So wherever our eyes are focusing, we see something that's completely different that depends on the context. So once again, there's something very strange that's going on with the way that we interpret information that we see, which really gets you to think, what is reality? Is what we see exactly what's happening in the real world? And we already know that this is not the case because, for example, if you have a dog or some kind of pet that has a super hearing or a super smell, they're able to experience something in the world that we're not able to see. And we already know that we have very limited capacity in our eyesight to see a very specific range. Also, our brain is a comparison machine. It always compares to something that's happening in the context. So here the comparison is in the context of the color, whether it's bright or it's dark, but here the comparison is to everything around it. So which black circle is bigger? It's exactly the same size, but over here, the left one seems to be a lot bigger than the one on the right. So a lot of curious things that the brain is actually causing. And you can study this kind of stuff. It's really cool. Some of the people in the department at HKU are studying vision and trying to understand what's happening inside the brain. And one of the experts is this guy who I follow on Twitter. He has this amazing website that I really recommend that you go and have a look. I took a bunch of stuff from his website in order to demonstrate this to you. So all the credit goes to him. You can see a little bit from his background. It's the illusions that he came up with. So he studies what goes on in the brain and how our brain interprets this. And then he tries to fool our brain to see something that's not actually there. So this is an interesting one. Everything that you see here is not moving, of course, and this is making a little bit dizzy. But when we move our head to the right or to the left, it seems like there is movement. So even though this is static and there's nothing going on, actually, just by creating a certain flow within the image, once you know how the brain interprets this, you can come up with all sorts of interesting illusions. Other versions of this is this one. Once again, nothing here is moving. The only thing that's moving is in your eyesight. So if you look to the right or look to the left or move your body a little bit to the right or the left, a lot of very curious things start to happen. And it's not clear what's going on here, but if you're an expert like the Japanese professor, you can actually study this and get to know this and perhaps construct your own illusions. And every year there's a competition of who does the best illusions. Here's another very interesting one. So it seems like moving to the right or moving to the left. If you go back and you go forward, or you go to the right or you go to the left, some things are happening. All the lines that you see here are straight, but they seem to be bent because of this combination of black and white and how he positioned these. So everything is in comparison. So you can even create the illusion that a straight line is not really straight, or some illusion of movement, even though there's nothing that's supposed to move. So a lot of really interesting stuff. Go on his webpage and have a look. And he explains, of course, how he comes up with this. He publishes academic articles on this. And some people in our department do some stuff that are related to these. This is one that I actually saw this morning on Twitter. It was really interesting because at the beginning, I couldn't really tell what is going on over here. what's so interesting about this deer? But then the Twitter post said, how about you just hold your mobile upside down? So this is what happens when you hold it upside down. You switch this, and it takes a second for the mind to readjust, but then suddenly you understand that there's actually no deer and everything is reversed. So actually at the end, after a few seconds, you see all these kind of wooden pieces, which is very different from how we saw things over here. So the depth is reversed. At the beginning, it seems like the deer is more towards us, but then when we look at the actual thing at the end, actually we see the pieces of wood that somebody carved. So if we look at these two together, it's exactly the same thing. The only thing that I did for you is reverse this. So you can even create some really cool illusions even without doing some special effects like the Japanese professor. So really interesting stuff in studying how the brain works and interprets all sorts of things. Okay, cool stuff. What can we do with this? This is an example that's coming to us from Iceland. And what you can see over here is that they created these elevated steps. So this is a crosswalk. And then we have a very busy street. And sometimes it's busy not because there's lots of cars, but it's busy because whenever there is a car, they really speed through this, even though there's a lot of pedestrians. And they really wanted to get people to slow down. If you have a regular crosswalk, just like the one on the left over here, they don't really slow down. They just expect, just like in Hong Kong, that people will wait for them to cross, and then you have a lot of accidents. And the question is, how can you get people to slow down? And turns out that when they see that there's elevated crosswalk, then actually they slow down. The thing is that this is of course not elevated. This is a visual illusion. So just by adding some of the shades to the crosswalk, it creates this illusion to the driver. So the driver actually thinks that something is floating over here, or people are walking on something that's floating, and they slow down. Even if they're familiar with this, the brain creates all sorts of things and it's hard to ignore. So at least it gets them to think about things again. We call this a nudge. I can show you a very quick video on what that looks like. Very, very cool stuff that they're doing in Iceland with these kinds of illusions. This thing we call a nudge. So we want to protect people. We want to help people make better decisions, like please slow down when you see pedestrians. But sometimes people don't play along, and we want to create something that's better for society. So we use some of these cognitive illusions in order to create something that will get people to reconsider their behavior and think again, considering that maybe they're going to hit something, especially if they're going to hit a pedestrian. So this is one curious example. Another example is that here on the left, for fitness, people who are going to fitness and going to exercise, the curious thing that they're doing is that they're taking the escalators in order to go to fitness. But the whole purpose of you going to the fitness is for you to exercise. So at least like take the stairs. Why would you need the escalators over here? So we try to nudge them. We try to get them to choose the thing that's healthier for them. For example, taking the stairs. So we do all sorts of things. Like, for example, we give them encouraging slogans like, I want to climb the stairs to fitness. And then it gets them to choose the stairs over the escalators. So another nudge. We don't change the options. The options are exactly the same. They can take the escalator or they can take the stairs, but we try to make the stairs or the healthier option a little bit more appealing to them by adding some information or changing something in the choice set. Another really interesting one is, I can't remember which country this is, something European, where most of the people from the underground tended to go for the escalators, but then they created this activity that caused people to try and consider the other option of actually taking the stairs. just by understanding how people think and what kind of preferences they have, and we have a preference for fun, then we can change something about something trivial like the stairs and make it something different to help people make the right decision. How do we process information, make evaluations, and make decisions? Here's an example, a very classic example by a person called Daniel Kahneman. He's the only psychologist to ever win the Nobel Prize. And in the 1960s and 70s, he came up with all these interesting demonstrations. So we teach this in judgment and decision-making class. And this is somewhat similar to what he published in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. So you can kind of consider this and think about this. What do you think the right answer is here? The best student in my MBA class, which was a master's in business administration, in Israel, I grew up in Israel, used to write poetry and is rather shy and small in size. So if you would need to guess what was the student's undergraduate, so this is a master's, what was the student's undergraduate major? Was it literature or was it economics? So you can give it a second and think about this. Also, try your best to guess what was the student's gender. Was it female or was it male? How to decide this kind of thing. So most of the people look at this and they read the description. They say, oh, writes poetry, and I even underline this, or rather shy and small in size. So has to be something like literature, or here people say perhaps female is more tendency to write poetry, or maybe smaller in size. But then the right answer is, of course, economics, and the right answer is male. Not because of anything, gender related in terms of writing poetry and rather small and shy and small in size, but more about MBAs. Unfortunately, when we look at MBAs, first of all, just in terms of the number of students that are taking literature and economics, economics is a much, much larger degree than literature. So when we look at the odds and we try to interpret statistically what is happening in the world, actually the description does not matter that much, because there's just so many more economics in MBA than there are people who studied the literature. So if we just look at the general statistics of the frequency of how many students there are in each one of those, it would make a lot more sense that this would be economics. Plus, an economics background is a lot easier to transfer to a master's in business administration compared to the other type. And unfortunately, still the case that there are a lot more MBAs who are male rather than female. I hope that you will help change this kind of thing. So moving away from the stereotypes still exist. So if you would have to do the best guess, actually the best guess is not according to the stereotypes of write poetry and rather small and shy in size, but rather about observing the world, looking at the base rate of what is the frequency of the males and females in the MBA class, and it's about 70-30. In Hong Kong, it might be a little bit even higher than this. Trying to change this, but if you need to make the best guess, you need to ignore irrelevant information. So this irrelevant information is shifting our biases, it's shifting our preferences or valuations, and this actually constitutes as a cognitive bias. Another example, maybe you would see this if you're going to the cinema, is given this choice. So when I go to the cinema and I want some popcorn, and I'm faced with, okay, I can get a small popcorn for $3. This is US dollars. I wish this was Hong Kong dollars. Or a medium popcorn for $7 US, or a large popcorn for $7 US. So people are faced with this choice, and when asked, what would you choose? And when I give this to large classrooms, and I give this in studies that I run, typically a lot of people tend to go for the large one. Why wouldn't you? It's a great deal. This medium one actually makes no sense. Who would want to choose this medium one? We want to get the large because for exactly the same kind of money, we get the large. But actually, this is a manipulation. And typically when you have irrelevant information, and the marketing folks, the companies really try to bias us to get and spend more money and get the large popcorn, So if we only had these two options, the one on the left and the one on the right, some of us prefer small, some of us prefer large. And then based on our preference or how hungry we are, we can make a decision, do we want the small or the large? But suddenly, just by adding one more option that makes absolutely no sense because nobody is going to buy this medium one, just because this irrelevant information was introduced, suddenly the companies are causing us to shift our preference to buy the large one. So this is kind of like very, very disturbing. So if you go to shopping malls, go to a convenience store, and you see a bunch of options, and one of the options doesn't make sense, sometimes the option is not there in order for you to buy that option. Sometimes that option is there in order to get you to buy something else. So in the business school, we are in the psychology department. In the business school, marketing folks actually teach you how to, do these kinds of tricks. In the psychology department, we try to help you to overcome these tricks. So understand how these tricks are affecting you and then try to devise a mechanism by which you can ignore the thing that's not relevant and then really make the choice that you want to make without being influenced by anybody else. So beware that companies are trying to do all sorts of things, and it's our obligation as judgment decision-making psychology folks to try and help the individual protect society in order to help people make the decisions that are better for them. And of course, generally, it's much more healthy to get the small. Plus, if you really don't need the large one, it's going to be a waste of food and money to just get the large one if you're not, if that's not what it is that you wanted. The last thing that I want to discuss with you in our limited time is about happiness. What is it that we're not seeing about our happiness? Is there some cognitive biases about our happiness over there? So I really like this kind of also Daniel Kahneman, the same Nobel Prize winning psychologist, about something called a focusing illusion. So this focusing illusion is they got two groups of people living in the Midwest, where it's generally very cold in the winters, to compare themselves to people from Southern California. And they asked them, so you compare to Southern California, who do you think is actually happier? And most of the people in the Midwest thought that South Californians are going to be much happier. And it has to do with the main contrast between these two, having to do with the weather. The weather in California is a little bit like the weather in Hong Kong. It's really comfortable weather. Year around, it's warm and nice. We don't get any snow. But actually, people focus on the wrong thing. So focusing illusion is focusing on the weather. When you compare yourself in the Midwest to somebody who lives in Southern California, you're focusing on the weather. But actually, when you look at the preference, what do people really care about? What makes them happy? What makes them happy is whether they have job prospects, the academic opportunities, the financial situation, the personal safety, social life. How much does the weather actually contribute to happiness? Not very much. So when you compare the levels of happiness, people living in the Midwest to people living in Southern California, not much difference in there. So sometimes we think that there's something that we really care about, but actually we don't really care about that it that much. How about money? Sometimes we think that if we'll get richer and we'll, the more money that we get, the happier that we're going to be. But actually, another study, also Daniel Kahneman, is that, up to a certain level, up until middle class, an increase in money and in income is going to help you become happier. But the difference is once you're in middle class, and most of the Hong Kong people are kind of well off, the difference between the people in the middle and the people who are very rich is very, very small. There's actually not that big a difference in happiness between different populations. So at the beginning, it grows up, but then it kind of stables. And then a lot of people saying, I'm going to work in order to get money so that I can spend it and be happy when I'm 60. But, you're living in the here and now, especially during times like the pandemic. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. So why work yourself to the point where you're not happy anymore just for future happiness, which you're not even sure that you're going to get. So I don't know why, but especially in Hong Kong, people spend a lot of time working and being very, very busy and not paying enough attention to their well-being and their happiness, thinking that if they have more income or if they have more success, this is going to bring their happiness. But this is a focusing illusion, because actually there's other factors about, you know, family and experiences, and the most limited resource that we have is actually not money. We're fairly well off in Hong Kong. The one thing that we're missing in our lives is time. We don't have a lot of time. The time for us on our earth, this earth, is very, very limited, and we need to make the most of it. So actually, we do a lot of studies about how people think about time and how people think about money. And for some reason, people emphasize money over time, but time is actually a lot more, you know, valuable and important. And it's especially when it comes to happiness, we should emphasize time more. And whenever we can, actually, if you can buy time, use money if you can, in order to promote your happiness. So buy time whenever possible. We have a bunch of articles on this, and we do some studies on that. When you ask people what it is that they want to do, 99% say that they would want to buy time, but actually when it comes to practice, we don't practice what we preach. So, and what it is that we think that we want, and only 17% when given the chance actually spend money to buy some time. So this is very, very curious, but also happens to millionaires. So it's not about the level of money. Some students ask me when I give these lectures, you know, great that you're teaching all this, but do you actually do these kinds of things? And I want to say life is stressful. Professors and students, especially in Hong Kong, work like crazy. But this is not what we try to promote, especially when we study people, their behaviors, the way that they think. We should, of course, emphasize well-being and happiness. So I try to do this in my own life. If you go on my Twitter feed, one of the things that I am most proud of in my during my PhD and during my time at HKU is not so much the articles that I published and the research that I do, but I especially like the hikes that I'm doing in this beautiful place. So if you want, you can go on Twitter and then see, you know, some of the places that I visit. And then people say, but things are really, really difficult right now because we're experiencing all sorts of things in Hong Kong, especially with the pandemic. Things are never going to be the same. You know, we can't travel. All sorts of things are not possible. And I just want to tell you, things are going to be okay. You know, we're adjusting. As humans, we tend to overemphasize the hardships. But if we look at, for example, you know, people think that marriage is going to make them very, very happy. There is this momentary happiness, but then afterwards they come to the same, you know, the same level. People think, well, what's happening if, you know, somebody that I care about is going to die? I'm never going to recover from this. But what we see is, you know, after a year or two, people will go back and recover, and even afterwards they become even happier because they see all sorts of opportunities. Also with divorce, you know, we adapt and we adjust and we gain our happiness. Also being fired, you know, things improve over time and things get to be okay. Even with a major injury, a disability, people think if I lose an arm or my eyesight, if I'm going to be disabled, I'm never going to be happy again. But when you compare the happiness of regular, you know, healthy people to people with disabilities, actually there's not much difference in the level of happiness between the general population and the people who are experiencing injuries. Also, a big difference is between the remembering self and the experiencing self. I'm not going to go into this, but it's a very classic phenomenon also by Daniel Kahneman, published about this. This is all to say, wrapping this up, is that there's two modes of thinking in our brain. There's one that's more intuitive, that acts on, you know, without effort, is very speedy, based on reflex. And there's one that's a bit more deliberate. And when we do judgment decision making, sometimes it really helps for us to move from what is it that we immediately are seeing and experiencing and thinking and feeling to involving a bit more deliberation by trying to understand what it is that's going on with us and make better decisions that we know will benefit us, especially, you know, looking at our entire lives and in the long term. So cognitive biases, all sorts of things that we should pay attention to. We mispredict our happiness. We misremember our experiences. We don't even follow what it is that we say that we really want or need. But one of the things that we do at HKU Psychology is we study these things. We try to understand how people think, how people feel, what are some illusions that they have or cognitive biases. And then using that knowledge and experience, we try to help people and society to do better and to improve. So that sums up my half an hour with you. If you have any questions or you want to discuss anything, then I'm going to spend a few minutes here to talk to you.